All right. Hey, it's Tom Jordan. In a moment, I'm going to have back on the program today Charlie LaDuff because he nailed it again in his latest piece. I caught it, and I want you to catch it as well. So I'll give you a quick summary of what Charlie has written about so eloquently with his two fingers because he's a reporter, not a journalist, which I respect very much so. Michigan's lame duck session, it turned into this total holiday circus, is the way he puts it. Exposing a whole slew of just dysfunction with the entire legislature, some arrogance mixed in there, and some ambition, maybe some selfish ambitions of these political elites. And the Democrat-led legislature, they try to ram through this monstrous amount, this number of this wish list that they had, very unpopular with most Michiganders, Michiganians, Michiganish, whatever you want to call each other, including these driver's licenses for illegal immigrants, billion-dollar handout for a billionaire, by the way, just in time for Christmas. Instead, a whole slew of infighting happened, a pretty strong resistance by a unified Republican Party. So we'll get into that in a moment with Charlie LaDuff. That's just a few seconds away. Also, just a reminder to chime in. Love to read your comments on the air. You can ask questions if you like, and you can pose Charlie some questions as well. We'll make sure he gets to respond to those in the comments section, whatever you're watching on YouTube or X, or on, where else are we? Facebook as well, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I'll get to those in a moment. Also, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live, simply subscribe, click that notification bell, share the video content. That helps us out tremendously. All right. Governor Gretchen Whitmer wasn't seemingly in the holiday spirit. Charlie LaDuff called out the governor for her absence during a whole slew of critical legislative moments over the past month, and accused her of, retreating to, as he put it, Mount Crumpet as the Grinch, while chaos ensued down below amongst the lesser people. Joe Tate, he's the leader of the House there. He failed tremendously. The House Speaker portrayed as ineffective, unable to really rally his caucus. And it kind of reflects poorly on his political future as well. And then there's Karen Whitsett, which I respected her move here. It was a rebellious move, but Charlie brings up another good point here, that it was actually self-serving. She's kind of the Cindy Lou in the Grinch story. Cindy Lou who? We'll get to Charlie. He'll explain all of this for you in better than I can. But she did refuse, Karen Whitsett did, to align with the Democrats, and it really helped torpedo the party's plans here, stepping out. And you got the Attorney General in the state, Dana Nessel, her threat to arrest people because she looked at members of the state legislature who refused to take part in these radical leftist votes. She considered them criminals, that what they're doing is breaking the law, and now she's considering charges. It was an empty threat. It was absurd when that came out. I couldn't believe I saw or was reading what I was reading, but it didn't have a real impact anyway. Dana Nessel, we'll talk about her. We'll talk about Mike Duggan, the mayor of Detroit, who's now running for governor, and all these attempts to switch it up in the legislature failed dramatically. All right, let's get in it right now with Charlie LaDuff. He's we're going to get to him in a moment. He's a former national correspondent for the New York Times, Fox Television as well. He was an American correspondent for Fox around the country. Also worked for many years in television in the city and the news market of Detroit. He's a New York Times best-selling author, and he currently hosts the BS NewsHour. And he puts out great pieces like this. Also on Enjoyer, it was where Michigan Enjoyer, I think it's what's Enjoyer.com. I believe is the website where he writes. But I want to get into it with him because, listen, I brought up this guy. I brought up Mike Duggan, right? He is the mayor of Detroit, a Democrat, but he switched to an independent party. Mike Duggan, he was portrayed by LaDuff as this powerless Burgermeister, if you get that reference as well, to another famous Christmas cartoon, I think claymation special that they used to watch on the olden days of television. But Mike Duggan failing to push through this billion dollar redevelopment deal for a friend, Dan Gilbert, who is a billionaire himself. And Dan Gilbert, the billionaire, is criticized for greed, development plans framed as exploiting Detroit's children, is the way that Charlie Duff puts it. And the reason for that is because he was asking for taxpayers to fork over about $1 billion for a development plan for Dan Gilbert. Dan Gilbert would also make a slew of money off of it. Why should taxpayers be funding things of this nature? You know, you hear in other cities and other municipalities about plans to fund, football stadiums and baseball stadiums, and there's a lot of, community involvement in that decision-making process. You put it up for a vote. If the populace decides, yeah, this looks like a good idea, I can see it being good for the city, or they decide otherwise. No, it would not be good for the city. We do not want taxpayer money going to the stadium. And a lot of football teams have left cities as a result of that because they want to make more money. But why should taxpayers be footing the bill for that? That's the sports world. We're talking about a development plan by a billionaire. Listen, Dan Gilbert you can argue, has done a lot of good for the city of Detroit. He's bought up a slew, I think dozens of buildings, high rises, and he's remodeled them. He's made Detroit more attractive than it was 10 or 15 years ago. So you can give him kudos for that, but now he's starting to dip in more to taxpayer dollars and taxpayer funding. And to me and to a lot of people, it certainly doesn't make sense. So why would they do that? So we're going to bring on Charlie whenever he's ready. And of course, Cameron Harris is, I think, talking with him right now to see if the shot's all set up and whatnot. But I like how Charlie Duff has gone against the grain. It's like a salmon fishing, swimming upstream. And he calls out these very, very powerful people who most people will not. And the media as well as misfit toys is how he portrays them in this latest piece as well. Let's bring him in. Charlie Duff, good to see you again. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
You too, Tom. Sorry, man. Technical problem. So
Oh, that's okay. We got time. We're not doing a whole lot here anyway. We're just talking about your stuff and what you're doing, and another great piece. And I was astounded. I was concerned in particular about what the Democrats in Michigan were trying to get through with these, 181 or more plus different bills that many were far, far extreme. And a lot of Republicans say, I won't vote for any of these things. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because the threat was, wow, this stuff's going to be crammed down the throats of Michigan citizens, whether they like it or not. It looks like it's going to go through. And then it doesn't go through. Much of it was denied because there just wasn't enough people there to even form a quorum. So can you talk about the GOP somehow uniting together to effectively block all this radical legislation?
well, that's kind of what they did. I mean, it's lame duck. The Republicans take over the House, and they're flexing their muscles. So, everybody not show up, which Dana Nessel seems to think is against the law. I think it's political speech. I think they are doing their job if they choose not to show up. It's been done many times before. And then you had, you know, one Democrat who wouldn't show up, but you had a lot of Democrats that weren't going for a bunch of this crap, like trans sex ed in the schools and gasoline tax and $1 billion for a billionaire, and we could, driver's licenses for illegals, and it better to stall it out. And the big question is, a lot of the Democrats are pissed off at Whitmer. Where were you? Where was the leadership? You were off in LA, you went to Spain, Lord knows what you did. I don't know how many Spanish jobs are in Michigan, but it was I got rid of cable a while ago, like a lot of people did, and I didn't get to see my old Christmas classics. I didn't need it because I had this comedy going on in Lansing, and thankfully, not a lot's been done.
Yeah, it was very. I mean, you can look at it as very amateurish the way they were handling this. But you brought up a good point, and I want to touch on this a bit because there are. I listen. I've talked. I know of Democrats who have not been supportive of a lot of these extreme far left, not necessarily liberal, but very far left progressive policies that they wanted to ram down the throats. Very few of them would speak out publicly against this. Karen Whitsett was one of them. I looked at kind of what she did as somewhat heroic because she prevented a lot of this from going through, but you had a different take on maybe the real reason why she was sitting this out.
Well, her pet project, well, first of all, I think, the Detroit contingent which is weird because they redrew the district lines. So a lot of Detroit doesn't get representation. It doesn't have black representation because they cut it up like a wagon wheel. So like my Senate district stretches from Beverly Hills to Dexter and Linwood. Beverly Hills, Michigan to the center of Detroit, Dexter and Linwood, and you don't see a whole lot getting done. So whether she was brave or not, I know one of her big deals was, her patrons belong in the public schools racket. And you remember back in the day, we bailed out the public schools and we created two Detroit public schools: the
Yes.
bankrupt, corrupt entity that held all the debt, and then the living, breathing entity, the Detroit's community school district, which is the teachers in the schools. So they bonded out this debt. So we're paying off this debt, this legacy of corruption and all of that from back in the day. And what Winsett wanted to do was to pay all of that off immediately. You and I and everybody else in Michigan pay it all off so we could loosen the money for the living school district, which is interesting. I support money going to human beings, but once again, the people will be held hostage in this state for the sins committed in the city. So that
Mm.
legislation wasn't getting to the floor, and she was pretty upset about it. What's interesting is at the last hour, the Speaker of the House offered to put it back in and bring it up for a vote, but I don't think there was going to be enough votes for that. So
Right. Yeah,
whether
he
she
was
was a
trying to
hero or
woo.
not remains to be seen. It just
Yeah, he was trying to
didn't
woo
get
Karen
done.
Whitsett back to the table here, and you're right. There probably wouldn't have been enough votes for that anyway, and it was being held up. But there's this desire for, in this case, and I know there's a desire on both sides of the aisle, but in this case, the Democrats just want to keep spending and spending. And you brought up this, which just boggles my mind, this $1 billion handout to billionaire Dan Gilbert. Thankfully, that failed, but for this Detroit redevelopment project, which he was going to make a huge profit on. So why is this constant push by this iteration of the legislature over the past couple of years, and even before that, because this whole SOAR fund started with Republicans and Democrats, hand in hand bringing this to the table. But more so than not, over the past 2 years, there's this desire to keep spending taxpayer money. Well, you had like a $9 billion surplus at the beginning of 2024. That's all gone, and you want to raise taxes to give it to guys like Dan Gilbert. Thankfully, that failed. But what are the implications of that? Because I know Mike Duggan was involved in that as well. Has he lost, as you say, maybe some political clout because he failed in this major venture?
Mike Duggan's lost a lot in Lansing. He doesn't have a lot of coattails. He can't get his congressional candidate through. He couldn't get that uh, land value tax through Lansing. He couldn't get this one through. So Duggan's got a real uphill climb if he wants to be a governor running as an independent. And he's going to be dependent on the billionaires because that's all he's got. He doesn't have, he pulls at zero on the west side. He's tied with Benson in Detroit, and he comes in third statewide. Buttigieg first. Buttigieg, my God, Buttigieg, and then
Buttigieg.
Benson, and then Gilbert. So
Yeah.
this is the last gasp of the, sort of radical left and the oligarchs. I don't know. Gilbert's a pretty slippery guy. This isn't dead, right? But this was the last gasp of the handout for the right wing Republican, old school country club rich guy. And the Democrats were amazing to me because what they're trying to push through was roundly rejected in this state and in this country. And at the last minute, they want to pull this shit, and we don't want it. So, get back to a balanced budget, fixing the roads, actually funding the schools, not expanding um, retirement for public employees, but funding the existing requirements now. We're not. It was a runaway train, and thank God it went off the tracks.
There's a lot of stuff that we just don't know about because of the whole FOIA issue, and we know that the legislature and the governor they're exempt when it comes to the Freedom of Information Act, and now teachers are as well. They keep talking about transparency, but it never comes to fruition. Do you foresee that ever that issue, which is to me paramount in the state, so guys like you and other reporters out there can really kind of expose what's happening behind the scenes. Do you think FOIA will ever be allowed in when it comes to the legislature and the governor's office and now teachers in the state in Michigan?
Well, we'll see. We'll hold the Republicans to it. I don't know, but we're only one of two states in the United States where the
Right.
executive and legislative branches are exempt from us getting to see how they're spending our money or how they're communicating or what they're doing. I mean, that's why this place is a mess. And I'm sick to death of the hipsters on the laptops, all this created by the Obama administration, of this echo chamber between the state apparatus, the media that has no audience anymore, and these young monkeys out of college creating an echo chamber where one says it, they all say it. It must be true. It's not true. That's the great gift of Elon Musk buying X. Because if everybody remembers, before he bought it, to get a blue check mark, you had to be Hollywood, a politician, or member
Hmm.
of the media. That's all who got to speak. Nobody else
Right.
got to speak. And if anybody spoke, they got run off of it, including the president of the United States. So
Right.
now that that cartel's been broken up, you see a little more information. I don't know. All you really need is the budgetary stuff, right? The rest is just scandal and who talked to whom. So FOIA is important, but it's not necessary to find out the governor is not counting nursing home dead. The governor's shaking down businessmen to get their airplanes. That the attorney general is covering up, you know, probably fraud, uh, and not investigating things properly. That you don't particularly need FOIA. What that fills in is the story of how things happen. So all you really need is, let me. I know I'm all over the place, but let me put it to this again. On Twitter, the regular citizen says we're the media now. Now we're the media. No, you're not the media, right? You have a voice, and you get to complain, and you get to express your opinion, but you're not the media because you're not out there digging stuff up. You're not
Hmm.
adding anything except your voice to it. So we still need some kind of revenue stream for people to be paid to do this stuff all day and all night and all week and all month long because it's not easy to do. Having good FOIA would make it easier for real. It'd be better for the citizen reporter. But, again, it takes a lot of time. So
It does. It
I
takes
don't have any
you got to
great hope
dig.
for it.
Yeah, it's a 24/7 job if you really want to be a good reporter because you do. I mean, FOIA, as you said, would make it a lot easier, but you've uncovered quite a bit of stuff without the use of FOIA. One of them being the whole nursing home scandal, which you revealed how deeply entrenched in that Governor Whitmer was, and you exposed lies. And of course, a Inspector General, I think, came out report showed actually guys like Charlie LaDuff were correct in this assessment of what was happening in these nursing homes, and the governor undercounted it. What do you make of Attorney General Dana Nessel threatening to arrest lawmakers because they didn't show up to their session? What's the deal with that?
Well, again, I don't have cable, so I didn't get to see a Christmas Story this year, but I didn't need to because I've got Dana Nessel, who's Scott Farkas, the bully. Except she keeps shooting herself in the mouth. She keeps shooting her mouth off. I'm gonna arrest everybody. She goes on the Twitter, right? Because she can't exist a moment not being in the limelight. So she threatens to arrest everybody for not doing their job, not showing up to work, and in the end, Scott Barkus gets punched in the nose by Ralphie, like stands up to the bully. In Michigan, we just learned to ignore Nessel because he's a bozo. That's what we get out of her.
Yeah. Well, but it's intimidating. I mean, this is why she said it was trying to intimidate people that they're going to be arrested unless they go back and vote on the things that she supports is effectively what she's trying to do here. I don't know if there's ever any type of recourse with someone like that trying to use her office, very powerful office. The attorney general can do a lot of damage in someone's life just by showing up at your doorstep and maybe threatening, you're going to have to hire some attorneys to potentially fight off a incoming, charge for who knows for what, but it seems that there should be some type of, do you think that the chickens are going to come to roost when it comes to Dana Nessel? Because it's not the first time she's done this.
No, I mean, tell me about it. Of course, it's blows back in your face, and there's a lot of pain attached to it. But okay, somebody's got to do it. Who's gonna be the Daniel Penny of Michigan politics? You got to
Right.
stand up to the bullies.
Yeah.
Eventually, it does come home to roost, and keep the powder dry. But I think she's in huge legal and public trouble just with the nursing homes, the treasurer of the state party, the investigation that was supposed to go into her. Um, this cabal of Democrats who use the machinery, even Benson, to in to their whim. And
Yeah.
if we keep pushing, and they don't have all three power nodes, they don't have the House, the Senate's a dead heat. I mean, all Whitmer can really do is veto stuff. I mean, so we'll see, Tom. There's nothing wrong with the American system. People say we got to tear the system down. We got to, No, we don't. The system is the greatest devised in the history of humanity. The problem is those who occupy the seats of the system are corrupt. And thankfully, again, this cabal of, you know, uh, communications experts typing to failed journalists, typing to law enforcement, typing to the executive branch, this whole embryo has been stomped. We've got a second chance, and while the cockroaches are running, you gotta go after them. You got to turn on the lights, and you got to take your society back. And we'll see. I think they're all shit scared now, don't you?
I think they're scared, and I think there's a lot of things. And in my view, when I look at Dana Nessel, you're right. She's been very, very proactive in going after Republicans or those types of conservative interests, but very seemingly protective of Democrats. And I go back down to the former House Speaker who was, arrested and charged with all sorts of, criminal activity, including, cheating on his wife, but also these things and how he was running his various funds. And lo and behold, there is a lot of evidence that shows, well, it wasn't just him. There's a lot of people in the state legislature who are also engaged in this kind of activity, and they refused to release that information because Democrats were involved, and they were admitted. So I forget his name. Somebody within the Attorney General's office admitted that, listen, it'd be very embarrassing for these other elected leaders who were also involved with, his name escapes me now, Chad, the former Speaker of the House who was arrested. But anyway, it would have revealed the real shenanigans
Lee Chatfield, right?
Yeah, Latfield. Lee Chatfield. Yeah, thank you. Lee Chatfield. Major scandal. And yeah, he should have been arrested because of the way he was using all this money and these funds. But that's the way, if people understood what was really happening in Lansing, that's the way the Michigan legislature works. And Dana Nessel was protecting a certain group of people involved, allegedly, in the same type of stuff, but they were Democrats. Maybe some were very high up in the Democratic power structure is what the talk is out there. So she wants to protect those particular individuals. So there's a whole slew of information there that if other reporters like you were engaged in the process, they can expose a lot of things for the benefit of the average Michigan citizen, like
Yeah, well,
like
so
you and me.
it used to just be that you would get, after a certain amount of days, 30, 60, 90, I forget what it is.
Yes,
We get those subpoenas.
right,
Would you subpoena? We don't have
right,
them. That's what you're
yeah.
talking about.
Yeah, well, see, but
Complaint
because
number two.
but she stepped in. That's my thing. Is that Dana Ness? It was
Yeah.
about to be released. Reporters showed up at the courthouse, and then Dana Nessel stepped in and had a judge block its release in perpetuity. I guess we still don't have it. It's still being held up by the courts because Dana Nessel came in and filed whatever she filed in order to prevent that information from coming out and landing on the desktops of journalists, reporters around the state of Michigan. So it's being
Well, let's
buried.
stop there for a second. Yeah. Ooh, the journalist of Michigan. Look here now. Lee Chatfield
Yeah.
got caught a couple years after term limiting out. So no
Yes.
journalist did anything. It was Lee Chatfield's sister-in-law, his brother, getting mad that he was
Yes.
sleeping with his wife.
Right.
So the brother and the sister-in-law go public. Lee's a pervert. That gets everybody's attention. But these journalists who live up there, this is the only beat in Michigan where you live in the petri dish of your beat. So how is it? No, this guy's taking jet airplanes. He's having champagne in Detroit. He's eating steaks in downtown Lansing. And no journalist ever figured this out until
Well,
two
they
years
might have
after
been
the
enjoying the
fact.
same
And now you
steaks.
want your paperwork. I tell you
Right.
what, bro, you
Yeah.
send me to Lansing, you give me 6 months, and I'll tear that thing down to the studs.
Yes.
They're a joke. And
Yeah.
everybody knows they're a joke.
I do wish someone would just pay you loads and boatloads of money for you to go out and do that. Just make that your full time gig forever, and just somebody funds Charlie LaDuff because you would expose a lot of this stuff. And I know that I remember your time with Bob Faccato and all the people you would approach, and it was great. It was great television because it was somebody who was standing up against the machine, the power structure that exists, not just in Lansing, but in all the municipalities around the state of Michigan. It was good stuff. But those days seem like they're gone. But I think the pendulum is starting to swing back. Hopefully, we'll get some more corporate sponsors to fund this kind of reporting that needs to be done for the benefit. So anyway, that's my pitch for Charlie LaDuff. Somebody sponsor that guy, give him a few $1,000,000 and let him start his own organization.
MichiganEnjoyer.com. Go to
Yeah.
MichiganEnjoyer.com.
Yeah. Great
It's the
stuff
new
there. Hey,
kid in
Charlie,
town.
MichiganEnjoyer.com. It's a great, by the way, it's great stuff on there too. A lot of great writers, including Charlie LaDuff. Oh, we got a comment here I want to bring up on the screen. It's Cameron Harris is bringing it up. Harry Sakalian. Hi, Tom. Given the depth of corruption in the Michigan legislature, please ask Mr. LaDuff how Michigan ranks for corruption as compared to the other 50 states. Thanks, Harry Sakalian. What do you think?
Well, the former U.S. attorney here said, he's the U.S. attorney, right? Said Michigan's the most corrupt state in the union, so you can take him at
Yeah.
his word. But I have covered Hawaii, California, Arizona, Nevada, New
Yeah.
York City. Yeah, it's.
Yeah.
Let me just put it this way: what's more, New York? 1 year, the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader were sentenced to 5 years in prison the same
Yeah.
year, right? We all know about Chicago. The difference is, in those places, they build it, they take 90% of the money, and then when the project's done, the 10% fig gets spread around, the halls of power. In Michigan, they take 90% of the
Yeah.
vig and put 10% towards the people. Like, um, this budget's whacked. It's wild. This last one that Whitmer signed. The school children got no increase in their per
Yeah.
pupil funding, even though inflation is 5%. So you would
Yeah.
think you would get a 5% increase to keep equal. No. So in order to avoid a budget deficit, what did the Whitmer administration tell the school districts? Eh, that 700 million for the teachers' pensions.
Mm.
Don't worry about it this year. We got it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's an unfunded debt going on now
Hmm.
because the state's not allowed to run a deficit, so they offshore it.
Mm.
And we're gonna get screwed. It's a powder keg. That's why Detroit went bankrupt, and nobody seems to remember squat.
No, it's like we're repeating it, and history does matter because we can learn from those failed mistakes. But pensions are notorious for bringing down cities and states as well, and counties. I've gone through it in other places where I've covered it, and these underfunded pensions. That's just part of the problem. But yeah, the money's going somewhere. We had a $9 billion surplus at the beginning of this year. Any idea where that money went?
Well, look, was it a surplus? See, I can't even get that straight. And I spend time. I do, Tom. I spend time and I Google around in the dark corners of the web to get the budgets and the COVID distribution ratios. And was it a surplus because inflation went up, so the sales tax collected would be higher, right? A
Yes.
windfall because of inflation? Or was it because Biden printed a bunch of garbage money and
Mm.
sent it here? Either
Yeah.
way, it's $9 billion. They plugged it. This is great. So they distribute it, right? And say like Ann Arbor gets 14 million. Ann Arbor gets Ann Arbor school districts. Great, we got 14 million. We're gonna do X. You would think Ann Arbor's smart. Ann Arbor is the richest school district in Michigan, but they're not smart. They take the 14 million, they plug it into the budget, and nobody realizes this isn't recurring revenue. It's not recur. It's a one-time deal.
Right.
Yeah, we'll
Right.
take care of it next year. Well, next
Mm.
year's just come, and you've got a $14 million deficit. What do? Well, first thing you do is you lay off teachers. You see how
Mm.
this works? You see how
Yeah.
stupid these people are? So
Yeah.
when people say, I'm for term limits, consider this. Maybe. But we tried him here in Michigan. And if you have term limits, you don't have people with, long, deep understanding of how funding and politics and all these little bushels of money work. What you have is a bunch of pinheads using Twitter to get famous, make videos of themselves, and they are lapdogs to the special interest lobbyists who actually write all this legislation, who cares nothing about good governance. All they care about is the bottom line. So you can have not term limits and have a swamp like McConnell, Pelosi, etc., or you can have term limits and have a bunch of no-namers running around giving us tampons in the schoolboys' bathroom and driver's licenses to illegal. And while we're all locked in our house, you're redoing the election law. Take
Mm.
your pick.
Mm. Yeah. So I guess the bottom line to Harry is that Michigan is very corrupt, but there's a lot of stiff competition out there. Charlie mentioned some of them: Chicago, Illinois, and New York and California. That's pretty tough competition.
It is.
MichiganEnjoyer.com is where you can find Charlie Duff's pieces. You can see him on X too, and that leads you to wherever you're writing, but also NoBSNewsHour.com. Was your podcast is there as well? Where else are you? You're all over the place. I see you on. It doesn't matter where I go. There's Charlie LaDuff. Are those
You know
two
that.
primary locations? MichiganEnjoyer.com and then NoBSNewsHour.com?
Yeah, like the easiest way. Yes, all of that stuff. And click and give me the like and the subscribe. But if you just go on X, Charlie LaDuff, like all the links go to that. But then,
Yes.
I'm also just writing my little musings there. If I could really quickly,
Yep.
um, I'm looking at Canada, right?
Mm.
I
Yes.
live next to Canada. Canada's really important. Canada's letting a lot of terrorist suspects into our country.
Mm.
Canada is dumping illegal merchandise, you know, through the levers of NAFTA into our country. Trump's making fun of them. Why is he making fun of them? Because Trudeau and Canada are the biggest deadbeats in NATO. We're we're subsidizing Canada.
Yes.
Now, the Russians and the Chinese are very active in the Arctic Circle. Why are we talking about Greenland? Because we have military bases there. Because Greenland actually doesn't belong to Denmark. And if Greenland welcomes Xi in, what are we going to do? Why Panama? We built the canal. The Chinese companies are there building the high-speed rail, the bridges over the canal. I've been to Panama. I lived in Denmark. I love Canada. I'm paying attention to all of this.
Yeah.
And so
Good.
Trump's making it amusing. We're not invading anywhere. What he's doing in a very humorous way where the world watches is start pulling your fair share in this thing called collective sovereignty. Because you don't get free college up there and over there, and free healthcare up there and over there, and we get to pay for it. Pull your fair share. It's a new world.
Yeah, we're going to get. I'm glad you brought that up because we're going to get into that later in this particular program regarding Trump's statements regarding Canada, Panama, and Greenland as well. And you're right on there. And some of these reporters that are coming over, these political pundits, saying this is Donald Trump again, not cooperating with the rest of the world, and he's setting us up for more antagonism by the global elite, and as if that's what he's doing when he's trying to do is protect the sovereignty of the United States. So I'm glad you brought that up. You can find Charlie's stuff on X.com. Charlie, if you don't mind, we have one more comment to you. So I want to give you an opportunity to respond to this. Let's bring this up. It's from Taz is back. Hi, Taz. Does Charlie have any insights to how the least popular governor after COVID won? Was the competition, top five GOP candidates disqualified in their own misgivings, or did Dems play a hand to that? How do you think that Governor Whitmer was able to win a second term after the way she handled COVID?
It's the oldest trick in the book, man. We're talking about that cabal of the web of, the monkeys at the keyboards, but old school. Attack character and attack signatures. So, sure enough, the top five, Whitmer was losing to James Craig. She was scared of James Craig. The Democratic machine, and it's a good one, discovered all the fake signatures,
Mm-hmm.
wiped them out. Okay, wiped out the top five polling Republicans. Go down to number six. Number six was Tudor Dixon, polling at 0.5%. Tudor Dixon raised about $5 million. Gretchen Whitmer raised about 80 to $90 million, and it was a 10% spread. That's what happened. Get like this time around, it's the Republicans to take, but you can't come up with a goofball, right? You can't come up with a goofball on the Republican side. You're going to need somebody solid that's run a statewide campaign, that's talking sensibly, or you're going to give us Whitmer again, right?
Yeah.
It was simple math.
It was, and by the way, that was, you talk about this very sophisticated Democratic machine. The guy that discovered those signatures was Mark Brewer. He's the guy that found them and he exposed it all somehow. He's the former chair of the Michigan Democratic Party. He's an activist, heavily involved in the Democratic machine, and he's the guy that somehow was able to successfully kick off 5 members of the GOP who are on the gubernatorial ballot. You're right. It's a cabal. It's a cartel.
But there
Whatever you
was a
want to say.
There was a Republican operative too working on Tudor Dixon's, and his name's Fred. Fred also came up with it. So
Uh,
this
oh,
is total
okay.
war, dude.
Yeah.
This is total war. And here's
Yeah.
a little juicy thing before you kick me off.
Sure.
Dana Nessel founded this, special interest group, a nonprofit, to push gay and lesbian agenda. Nice. Okay, good. Nessel becomes attorney general, so she leaves that little group, and her wife ends up running it. Her wife is the president, and
Hmm.
her mother-in-law is the executive director of this thing.
Oh,
In
wow.
2020, 6 months before these 5 people get kicked off the ballot, Nessel's wife paid that signature collection company $1 million. $1 million. 6 months later, that signature collection company um, was caught faking signatures. Now we have a conflict of interest here. Nessel said she's going to bring these people to trial, and this is 3 years later now. What's going on, madam? Well, why haven't you recused yourself? And has anybody,
Hmm.
so I kind of been looking into that. Like, what's the connection? When Nessa was head of this nonprofit, did she pay this group
Yeah.
money for signatures? And it should be noted, this signature group that Nessel and or her wife hired, the head of it was found guilty of a felony in 2011 for instructing his signature gatherers to make up signatures.
Hmm. Yeah,
I'm
so
not
all of that
kidding.
is there. That is a whirlwind of information right there. I was not aware of that at all. That's why we need people like you and Lansing to cover this stuff. And I'm glad
Well,
you're
that's
doing
why you
this.
have to tune into the Tom Jordan show.
Right, to bring on the Charlie the Doves of the world, but that would potentially implicate Dana Nessel's wife, if not herself, in all of this. Wow, this is crazy.
Oh,
All right,
and
follow
while
Charlie
we're at
on
it,
X.
Madam Nessel, I still would
Yes.
like the bank statements showing that you did indeed pay for your exotic trip to Turks and Caicos. I'm not just
Hmm.
taking your word for it. That's not over either.
No, it's not. Yeah, gosh, it's just so frustrating to us as we've watched. Listen, I've read a lot of your stuff when you've written specifically about Dana Nessel and the corruption that I also believe exists within her office. And the pushback against you when you do this is pretty severe, and others as well. So keep strong in this, Charlie. And I look forward to continuing to read your stuff. Follow him on X. You'll be a smarter person for it. Charlie the Duff. Thanks so much. Good to see you, buddy. Thank you.
Love you, Tom. Happy Hanukkah. Happy New Year.
Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year, and here's to a great 2025. Yeah, it's amazing. We were just going to talk about the lame duck session, all the corruption, and all the things we're trying to push through against the will of the people. But just that in that small conversation, there's just the tip of the iceberg about how depth the corruption in the state of Michigan is. And listen, if the reporters are listening, anybody who watches, maybe you don't, but you oughta look at this stuff as intriguing enough for you to go out and cover it and push back against your news directors and your editors and say, you know what, these are legitimate news stories. We may have right now in Michigan the most corrupt entities in power that maybe we've ever had, and that's saying something in the state. If only we had reporters willing to look at it. And maybe there are a few out there, but let's get more of them around and expose what might be going on in our government in Michigan. And then maybe that trend will continue around the country. So you can deal with Illinois, you can deal with New York, and you can deal with California, wherever corruption exists. That's our job as people in the media supposed to do that. And this whole lame duck session, I mean, the purpose of this was in Michigan. It wasn't about governing at all. It was about sneaking through very unpopular, radical agenda items while avoiding voter accountability. They had a few months left and they wanted to get it through because they were getting out of office. Their power was stripped from them. So before it's totally stripped, they're going to get this stuff through whether you like it or not. And Governor Whitmer was nowhere to be found. Her absence during the critical legislative chaos reveals, as Charlie pointed out, a fundamental failure of leadership on her behalf. Where is her mind on this? Is she looking at 2028 potential? I would say yes. That's where her mind is. And the House Speaker, Joe Tate, wow, his inability to unite his caucus. And listen, I don't think they were ever truly united in the first place. Many Democrats were not supportive of this radical legislation they wanted to put through, but they were being intimidated pretty heavily by the leaders within their own party to publicly support this stuff. So you appear to be united when there is absolutely disarray within the Democratic Party because of the radicals on the far left within it. So, you can kind of blame Joe Tate here. You can kind of say, okay, he had no chance. Once they all realized, yeah, our power has been stripped anyway, I'm not going to support, as a Democrat, some of the things that Charlie went down the list there in this radical agenda. And so you can look at Joe Tate. Some people say he was incompetent with the Michigan leadership there. If the majority party can't organize itself to pass its own agenda, how can it possibly govern effectively on behalf of Michigan residents? So there's a question there. But I think there's a deeper issue as to why that is. And the whole $1 billion, they hand over $1 billion in taxpayer money to billionaire Dan Gilbert, is this outrageous example of what Charlie would call in his piece crony capitalism. It prioritizes enriching the powerful over investing in Michigan's struggling communities. And that's how out of touch the legislature is with everyday citizens, despite the fact that Democrats claim that they're the ones who are caring and providing what is needed for the lower income earners in the state. And then Dana Nessel, the Attorney General of Michigan, she constantly threatens people with arrest. And she did it again with state lawmakers because they didn't show up because they were in opposition to these bills. The fact that they skipped the session, so she wanted to arrest them so her radical far-left agenda would pass. Even though she's not a member of the legislature, she's an attorney general. Her only focus is enforcing the law as stated within the framework of the Constitution. That's it. And she claims that's why she was going after these lawmakers. She didn't have a case here. It was an intimidation tactic to get some of these things done and passed. It's an authoritarian streak that exists within the Democratic Party, and it's unbecoming, if you will, of any public official. Using political power to intimidate dissenters. It's not only unethical, but it does set this dangerous precedent that's already been set that erodes the public trust in the rule of law, which, of course, has been greatly eroded over the years based on what we've seen on the federal level as well as the state level in California, in Michigan, in New York, for sure, in Illinois. So good for the GOP this time around, uniting, and they blocked a lot of bad stuff from getting through. All right, we're going to talk about some headlines here. Let's talk about, this is breaking this morning, Joe Biden, there he is, and Hunter Biden hanging out with some very powerful business people from China. The very people that Joe Biden said he's never met with, never engaged in any business meetings with those very people right there. So these are newly uncovered photographs that were obtained by America First Legal through a lawsuit against the National Archives. These were in the National Archives. And now they're raising serious questions about President Joe Biden's repeated denials of involvement in his son's Hunter Biden's business dealings. And the images were taken during then Vice President Biden's 2013 trip to China. And they show him right there mingling with Hunter's business associates and high ranking Chinese officials, including President Xi Jinping and then Vice President Li Yanqiao. So America First Legal, they said, listen, the photos implications, they put out a statement saying that, listen, they confirmed that Hunter arranged meetings between his father and what's known as BHR partners and the executives there. You had Jonathan Lee, you had Ming Shu during that trip. And these meetings, according to the group here, they granted Hunter's business partners access to Joe Biden's political influence, including connections to then U.S. Ambassador to China, Max Baucus. This should be all over the place. The photos, these images being released, it intensifies the scrutiny, hopefully does, of the Biden family's ties to these Chinese entities, particularly in light of the fact that President Biden's, he denied that he ever met with these people, never discussed business with Hunter ever. Yet we've seen him on Air Force Two, flying with his vice president father on trips overseas to China. On those trips, Hunter Biden striking some pretty lucrative business deals as well. So, was he lying? Was he telling the truth? And what about the pardon that he just gave his son? There's a lot of GOP lawmakers now, and rightfully so, and commentators. They've called the photos damning evidence of corruption, potential corruption at the very least, pointing to Hunter Biden's email exchanges and the testimony from his former business partners that all of this was going on. And it corroborates all of Joe Biden's involvement in this. And the White House now is silent, but there's calls for transparency again. They're growing louder, which entangles the president in a web of these unanswered questions. I don't know if he cares anymore, just so long as his boy Hunter there has been pardoned from what appear to be obvious crimes over the past 10 plus years that involved Joe Biden, by the way. Talking about crime, let's go to California right now. The decades-long experiment out in California where they're soft on crime policies, they've hit a wall there. It's a seismic shift based on the voters out there in California who are sick of what you're seeing right there. All the crime and the drugs and the fentanyl that's going through this community, supported by the corrupt California legislature and whatnot. So voters out there, they overwhelmingly passed what's known as Proposition 36, which dismantles these key elements of the 2014 law, Proposition 47, which had downgraded felonies to misdemeanors, which allowed all of this to take place. So this new measure, which was called the Homelessness, Drug Addiction, and Theft Reduction Act, aptly named, seeks to restore order in that state of California, which has been plagued by rising crime, homelessness, and drug addiction. All that stuff was being allowed to take place. Riverside County Sheriff Chad Bianco, good guy, He praised this move, and he says, this is a game changer. It's a return to common sense. So under Prop 36, thefts under $950 and possession of certain drugs can now result in felony charges. You are allowed to steal stuff from stores in California so long as you only got away with less than $950 worth of merchandise. If it was $940 worth of merchandise, good to go. That's how they were approaching it out there. Well, now it'll result in these felony charges, and it's this reversal that's pretty stark. These policies that critics had said the reversal of those policies, the ones that encourage all this lawlessness on the streets. Voters also ousted the very progressive Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon, who was a George Soros-backed district attorney in Los Angeles. And the tenure that he had there faced all sorts of backlash for the leniency toward criminals. Business leaders like Bob Larkin of Allied Universal praised the measure as a lifeline for California's struggling retailers and communities, while critics were expressing a whole lot of concern about the increasing incarceration rates. So in order to keep people from being, going to prison, essentially their plan was just to let them get away with crimes so we can keep the population in prison low. That doesn't solve the issue, right? The core issue is the fact that crime was going up. Broader cultural shift happening on California. That's a good sign. The weary of the unchecked theft, the rampant drug use, the skyrocketing homelessness there on the streets, and they're demanding accountability. And Sheriff Bianco, he's like, listen, being safe isn't partisan, is what he said. He says it's fundamental, and he wants to get back with his department, with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, to fighting crime as it should be fought. All right, now to what Charlie LaDuff brought up just a few moments ago, Donald Trump's kind of the Christmas Day social media posts were not very cheerful in a sense, but he was calling out Joe Biden's, the pardoning or the commuting the sentences of these very violent murderers and whatnot. And why was he doing that? The families of the victims were horrified by what Joe Biden did. So that was part of the holiday message. But there was a kind of this bold, what you might call a redefinition of America's priorities, from suggesting Canada as America's 51st state. He was calling Justin Trudeau Governor Trudeau. He was being funny about it, but he's making a broader point here, is that we're funding Canada, which Charlie just brought up, like they're a state of the United States, like they're one of our states. So why not just make them the 51st state if we're providing them with so many American taxpayer dollars? He also wants to reclaim the Panama Canal, and he wants to buy Greenland. That's Greenland right there. And it was provocative. These declarations, of course, they grabbed a whole lot of attention on social media, and all these pundits came out and said this is irresponsible for him to do this, and that's not our country. He's trying to invade these places. No, he's not. He's actually wants to partner with them to protect American sovereignty, because there are military bases, as Charlie pointed out, on Greenland that need to be there, because you got in that area where Greenland is located. You got threats from Russia, from the Eastern European bloc. You got the Asian threat, all of them gathering momentum on wanting eventually to overthrow the United States. If you buy Greenland or somehow partner with Greenland, which is not a Denmark-owned state, as some people are saying here, but military bases out there protect the United States. Seems like it makes sense to me. A legacy media outlet out there dismissing all of this as just typical Trump rhetoric and bluster is what they'll call it. But foreign policy experts see a pretty calculated move to bolster U.S. security in the face of what? Who's growing influence? China in that region. And so you've got like a former Trump advisor, his name is Kyron Skinner, calling it a new geography of alliances. And you're emphasizing the need for a security belt to counter threats from China's economic grip on global trade routes, to North Korea's nuclear ambitions. Trump's critics are focusing on his hyperbole here, but allies like, Sebastian Gorka, you probably heard of him. He's now on one of these networks out there. But listen, he's arguing these positions are rooted in reclaiming American dominance over key assets like the Panama Canal. It's now flanked by Chinese-controlled ports. The Panama Canal, we sold that. We built it. And I think Trump posted about how many lives were lost in the building of the Panama Canal. I think it was like 380,000 as a result. I mean, it's crazy. And then Jimmy Carter sold it back to Panama for $1 in the 1970s. Why do we do that? And now we've got growing threats from the south of the United States, from China itself, right around the Panama Canal. There was a former deputy national security advisor. Her name is Victoria Coates. She predicts that this vision extends beyond, just rhetoric here. Greenland's resource potential, it's a resource-rich area there. You can leverage, Canada's energy market as well. Donald Trump is positioning America to dominate, these strategically critical regions. So important. You got a CIA analyst, summing it up, say, listen, Trump's message is clear. We will not be walked on anymore. For supporters here, the boldness signals this revival of kind of Reagan-esque foreign policy. It's unapologetic, it's very assertive, and it's American, right? All right. Let's end on a nice, kind of a fun note, kind of intriguing. I want to show you what's happening out in California, not politically. We've talked enough about California politically here, but in the ocean, 60-foot surf. If you've heard of Mavericks, it's a place, it's a surf spot in what's called Half Moon Bay. It's near San Francisco up in northern California. The waves are up in California all the way from San Diego on up through Half Moon Bay. Like in San Diego, they got 10 to 15-foot surf at places like Blacks, La Jolla, Del Mar, Encinitas, great surf spots down there, but all the way up to here in Northern California. This is how KCRA in Sacramento reported on it. They say, it's pretty righteous out there, dude.
Few words can describe what it's like in that cold and choppy water. Only a certain amount of people try to chase what's further away. What are they chasing? The thrill of a lifetime.
Pretty righteous conditions out there.
Chase LaRue has just returned to shore, breathing heavily, but with a big grin on his face.
The swell started filling in, and eventually a nice solid peak came my way, and I stroked into it, scored it.
What did he score? One of these giant waves off the coast of Half Moon Bay. This week's storms make conditions perfect for Mavericks. Surfers like Chase can't resist the opportunity to ride some of the biggest waves in the world.
When I see the swell on the horizon, we know it's out in the ocean 1,000 miles away. It's on its way. And I'm just biting my nails, holding my breath, just getting ready for these sessions, and it's just such a relief, actually.
But these monstrous waves were hard to see from the shore. Thick fog blanketed the horizon. Many had to climb a hill to get a better vantage point. Those who brought drones got the best look, and what they saw blew them away.
I've seen a lot of guys basically risking their lives on these really, really big waves.
Jack Persons drove along the coast Monday morning observing the giant waves. He knew Mavericks would be the spot.
I get nervous watching these guys just with the size of these waves. I don't think I've been out here on a day like this where it's this big.
Waves that hit 60 feet during high tide. Dozens of surfers in line, all of them ready to test the power of the Pacific Ocean during a winter storm.
I'm a dedicated Mavericks guy. I wait for the waves to come to me, and I just stay ready all year.
Ready for the next time Mavericks calls his name. In Half Moon Bay, Ryan Curry, KCRA 3 News.
All right, that's crazy out there. I have a guy that I grew up with. His name is Ryan, and we grew up surfing in San Diego, and he moved up north, and now he's one of the main guys at Mavericks. And I tell you, that break there, there was a guy back in the 90s, Mark Fu. He was just a big wave surfer from Hawaii, and he found out about Mavericks in California as this big, heavy break, and he went there and he was killed, sadly, but surfing, and just experienced surfers out there taking on, really, it's a life and death situation. I would never do it. I'll admit to you right now, I was never a big wave surfer like that, but I know guys who have, and they've survived, many of them. But it's dangerous, but it's a fascinating thing to watch. These waves come in and these guys take off. All right, we got another comment here. Let's bring that up here with Jim Chikowski is back. Hey, Jim, how are you? My take on how Governor Whitmer got reelected was underhanded techniques, legalizing dope, and then abortion, along with Republicans not helping Republican candidates. Yeah, Jim, you're right. The Republican Party in the state of Michigan during that time was very fractured. There were a lot of people who would not fund the candidates that ended up going through the primary because of the fraudulent signature scam that came through and knocked five. James Craig was a leading candidate for the Republican Party, but he was kicked off because there was fraud committed against him and his campaign. And then you find out, which Charlie LaDuff just revealed on this program, that the funding for those signature gatherers was given by the wife, apparently, this is allegedly, I'm going to say allegedly here, the wife of the Michigan Attorney General, Dana Nessel. That was going on. I did not know that until Charlie LaDuff brought that up. He's writing on it. He's working on it. He'll reveal if what he finds evidence to point towards that. But that's major accusation. Again, we're saying here on Tom Jordan Live, that's an accusation. It's allegedly, but, you know, just think about who was the one that found out about those fraudulent signatures in the first place. It was the Democratic activist Mark Brewer, who did not want James Craig to run against Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Somehow he found out that enough fraudulent signatures were gathered on his behalf to kick him off the ballot. Go figure how that happened. Hey, thanks for your time. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Enjoy it. We'll see you back here Monday for another edition of Tom Jordan Live. 9 a.m. Eastern is when we stream. You can find us, of course, on Facebook, X, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts as well. God bless you. We'll see you next time.